In 1773, colonists disguised as Mohawk Indians dumped tea from the British East India Company into Boston Harbor. Hey, this is Mr. Wesley. Welcome back to the Homeschool History Show. Today, we're going to learn about why the Boston Tea Party was another great moment in history. So, by 1773, remember that group of pilgrims that got lost on their way to Jamestown Colony? Well, they and their friends and more English people kind of kept growing, and that place of the two colonies became 13 whole colonies called New England. So the United States as we know it at the time didn't exist yet. Right? And it was divided up by three colonial powers, three European countries, Spain, France, and, you probably guessed it, England. And they called their colonies New Spain, New France, and you probably guessed it again, New England. So Boston at the time was the most important economic city. It means where things were bought and sold and where money changes hands and ships come in and out and business was Boston.
Now, there are a couple of things that happened that kept frustrating the colonists about the British. Simply raising a tax on tea wasn't enough to send people into violence, but it was the last straw. The last thing people would take without fighting back. Let's look at some of those things. In 1765, the Stamp Act was passed, which required the colonists to pay a tax represented by a stamp on various forms of papers, documents, and playing cards. In 1767, the British government passed the Townshend Act, which was another tax on just about everything, including paper, oil, paint, and tea. This didn't make the British very popular. Finally, on March 5th, 1770, 9 British soldiers fired into a crowd of 300 or 400 colonists who were surrounding them, insulting them, and throwing stones. It is worth pointing out that they were later put on trial for murder and found innocent. The lawyer who defended them in court was none other than John Adams, the second president of the United States. Despite being found innocent, however, the event was called a massacre in the media of the day, which was mostly newspapers and pamphlets, and succeeded in making colonists more upset about British rule. It is very important to point out that every society, including the United States today, has taxes. Taxes are money that goes back to the government so that the government can operate. The problem that the colonists had was that they were being taxed by Parliament, which was way back in Britain. In Parliament, which is a bit like our House of Representatives, it's actually where we got the idea from. Representatives passed laws, including tax laws, for both Britain and the colonies. The colonies, however, were not represented. This means that nobody was there to speak up for their needs, concerns, or desires. The colonists were willing to pay taxes, just not into a system in which they had no say. For this reason, the motto of the Sons of Liberty became "No taxation without representation." This phrase became very famous and describes the primary cause of the American Revolution. The most famous Sons of Liberty were Sam Adams and John Hancock, who went on to sign the Declaration of Independence, as well as Paul Revere, who was famous for his midnight ride when he warned his friends Sam and John that the British were coming. There were, however, over 30 members in several colonies, not just Bostonians from Massachusetts. Wouldn't it be easier just to pay a little tax than fight a war?
The colonists who lived there, remember, these are the people who inherited the Mayflower Compact. They're used to having something to say about their government. Well, their government back in Britain, where this tea was coming from, who owned the whole place, well, they had a king, and the king kind of felt differently. He felt that his voice was the only one that mattered. The way the British king saw it, this colony belonged to him. And since it belonged to him, they were going to drink his tea and pay him for his tea. If they wanted other tea from other places, too bad. Get your own colony. Well, that's kind of exactly the idea that they had. This idea, you'd think, like, why do you want to get rid of your own tea, right? This is what people drank for breakfast. They weren't really into coffee yet. No Starbucks. Drink tea. It's the English way. They still do it. Why would they want to throw that all away? You know, if you guys had hundreds of cans of soda, would you dump them all in the river? I somehow doubt it. But for them, protesting for the right to buy whatever tea they wanted and to have something to say about how their government works was more important to them than having something to drink at breakfast. So the Boston Tea Party is a famous protest. And that's what makes it another great moment in history. So remember, stay great. Until next time, I'm History.